We have Mr. Chris Adams, Vice President, General Manager, Strategic Space Systems Division for Northrop Grumman. Give him a round of applause. Mr. John Hill, he is performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, and he's also the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space and Missile Defense. Reasonably trainable, good. Dr. G.P. Sandhoo, he's a Senior Advisor at the Space Development Agency under the United States Space Force. And Rear Admiral Heidi, Bulldog Berg. She's the Deputy Commander of Fleet Cyber Command and Deputy Commander, Navy Space Command. Glad to give Admiral Berg a call sign so you heard it here first. So I'm going to start with Mr. Adams from Northrop Grumman. And I told him this right off the bat. Sometimes you get these great panels and they'll focus on a couple of uniforms up here. And the next thing you know, with 60 seconds left, and this little thing down here blinking red, oh, yeah, it's 45 seconds. Industry, you got anything to say? I'm starting right with industry because this panel is about the critical role of industrial space assets in maritime security. So I'm going to go right to industry off the bat. And Mr. Adams, hey, the space industry is moving fast. You can't wake up without a new headline. There's a lot of Elon out there, but there's a lot of other companies doing great work and a lot of innovation in space, making our daily lives easier. Hey, can you give us a broad overview of where the space industry is going right now and what they're trying to achieve?
Sure, and I appreciate the time starting with industry. I'll start with this. There are a lot of missions migrating from other domains to space. Some of them are being replaced, some of them are redundancy for resiliency reasons, etc. And this is really also driving a need for affordable, proliferated systems to get after some of these missions effectively and economically. One could argue those solutions are great economically, and they're good through certain phases of conflicts against certain adversaries. However, we don't feel it replaces the need for more differentiated, be it technology, be it mission, but differentiated, higher value systems to stay in front of commercial and ultimately to stay in front of the adversaries. These survivable and durable needs are really important through all phases of conflict. But what we really need to do is strike that balance, right? And both of those two equities have to be very interconnected, and we'll talk about a lot of the details on this panel. But this growing resilient space industrial base, it is a national asset, and it requires a clear demand signal to assure they stay mission ready and they stay ready to fight.
Thank you. So, Mr. Hill, you have been an OSD in space policy for 12 or 13 years. So, through several administrations and through a lot of changes in technology and opportunity, how have you seen policy or the issues around space evolve from the DoD standpoint?
Sure. So I'll take it in two parts: the sort of the national security environment evolution, and then the industrial and how you approach that. From the national security perspective, I came into the office in 2013 at a time when what China was becoming capable of in space from a counter space side was becoming increasingly evident. But also, we were starting to see what China was capable of doing from a using space side. And the whole focus really over the last dozen years, and pretty much a straight line, has been recognizing what do we have to do in the United States Defense Department, intelligence community, from a national security perspective, what do we have to do to assure the uses of space that the Joint Force depends on, that the President depends on for decision making and nuclear command and control and so forth. And we increasingly have to look on saying we now have a challenger. China is very capable of using space to enable its forces. So we now have to look and say, what are the things you have to do when you must to deny hostile uses of space, as you would in any other domain? you're having a really an inflection point starting to happen in this same era where innovation has shifted. It is no longer driven from the requirements side of the Defense Department. It is now clearly being driven from the innovation and the commercial side. And so what we have to do in order to move fast, because you have to move fast with a very capable competitor in China, you have to leverage what industry is bringing forward and figure out how to use that in the Defense Department rather than trying to set the requirements first and then tell industry what to make for you.
How do you think we're doing on that?
We're working on it.
So we're a bit more,
It'll be a continuous process, frankly.
so you're saying we're a bit more, the DOD, a bit more true requirements oriented, vice opportunity oriented.
There will always be requirements oriented, and there will always be some more capability and opportunity oriented. I'm saying the balance is shift and figuring out which of the mission areas where this is going to be a really unique national security thing. We're going to have to do the figuring out the requirements internally for how to do that versus something that we can leverage what's coming out in the commercial sector and being driven by non-defense demands. And that will leverage competitiveness and innovation that will happen outside of the Defense Department.
Great. So, Dr. Sandhoo, so Space Development Agency. I loved my interactions with them. I was on active duty and got to sit a couple of panels with Dr. Tournier. I always had his boots on, and I always had a great affection for him because he was a lowly submariner like me until he became a space superstar. So, space superstar, I say, because the Space Development Agency has got a reputation for moving fast and delivering capability and zero tranche money. Just every day there was a bit of something new going on. So how has Space Development Agency done that? And are you going to be able to keep that momentum and minimize accumulating the barnacles of bureaucracy?
Yeah. Yes, we are going to try. So I think it's kind of important to remember why, to Mr. Hill's point and Chris Adams' point a few minutes ago, that why was Space Development Agency kind of created, right? It predates both the Space Force and Space Force, right? So back in March of 19, the goal was how do you actually face the threat in an architecture that's resilient and is survivable. Chris just mentioned a few minutes earlier that we are able to now build systems we call specifying stuff that was, maybe airborne or maybe another platform that was flying. So we're going to do that much cheaper. I don't need to go build a new system that is flying on an airplane, but I can put it in space a lot cheaper than I used to be able to, right? That technology is already there. So for the longest time, we have been in the space business trying to go through the whole tech development piece of that. So the goal was to, what can we build very fast, very quickly, and proliferate it, so we can meet the facing threat and have an architecture that is survivable. So that's what you'll see when Space Development Agency does, it is two problems, not taking the whole space lane, right? Two problem sets, beyond line of sight targeting, and the advanced missile threats, right? Which is the hypersonics and those kind of things, right? So that technology kind of was not there for the space piece in terms of the hypersonic. We had that technology, but it's not in there was a gap in the coverage. So by coming with an architecture that can provide coverage for that and then be able to do the line of sight targeting is what the Space Development Agency is focused on. We're leveraging everything commercial with fixed price contracts, which from an agency perspective has been a challenge, and our perspective has been a challenge up to this point, but we'll get there. So the momentum comes down to if we continue to maintain the support that's needed to do that. And we feel in the joint force field that we have to be able to do this. Tranche 0 is flown out of Federal, right? So that was mostly demonstrations. Getting to some exercises, not everything we have tested most of the things we have had to test in Tranche 0, but not everything has been tested up to this point. Tranche 1, we, based on what we learned from Tranche 0, we'll be launching that campaign starting later this summer, delayed from what the original plan was, but we have to make sure that when you try to provide a minimal warfighter capability, you have done the diligence that you need to do to make sure you deliver that. Our into that 2 years long center launches, because we have to face the threat. So that's the truth.
Do you think industry is going to be able to keep up with your pace?
I believe so. I'll let Chris talk to that, but it has been a challenge from many perspectives, both in industry. So there's a number of reasons. The production line for a spacecraft, we still have to learn how to do things in a production perspective, right? Not to say go back to Model T thing, everything we have done in space up to this point, with the exception of SpaceX, I think everything is kind of bespoke. And to get into this mindset, and there's always this mindset that you have to test everything, you have to, so there's a lot of shift that needs to happen. How we build things, how we deploy things, right? Space Development Agency, we build by tranche, right? But we test by each lane, right? And we deliver a capability, right? Which is different than building a spacecraft, testing it completely, getting it in orbit, do the checkouts, then handing it over, right? It's a different mindset from that perspective, and it takes time to adjust to that. We've done something certainly for 50, 60 years. Well, I think we'll get there. I think industry is ramping up. I think tranche 2 is going to be different than tranche 1. There are also many other issues with tranche 1, with the optical terminals, with the crypto. We can't go into those details here, but we are overcoming those and trying to, I don't know if Chris wants to add anything to that or not, but that's our perspective on that.
So I'll ask Mr. Adams, as maybe the DoD and other government agencies decide that we need to go to scale on some things, is industry ready to go to scale, similar to SpaceX, for the things it needs?
Yeah, absolutely, and we've been investing to do exactly that. I think the challenges noted are fair. A lot of this has to do with, at this speed and at this scale, the stability of the commitments, the stability of the industrial base, the stability of some of these smaller entrants that are doing this the first time and maybe don't have the scale and the backing and the expertise, require a lot of help from broader industry that's been successful before. So I think we're still going through a little bit of a learning period, to be fair, but we clearly see the end of the tunnel. We at Northrop are building Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. I will say the synergies between those two allow us to do a lot more speed, a lot more scale, and a lot more efficient build process. So yes, we are getting there.
Okay, great. Okay, Admiral Berg. So, Space Force stood up a little over 5 years ago. And when you stand up a combatant commander, in general, the services support combatant commander with capability, manning, etc. And but the Navy was the only service that did not establish a component command. The CNO at the time decided we'll do in support of. And so during my time back in active duty, that was one of the issues we were wrestling with back and forth. Should we establish this? Your boss, his predecessor, was pushing for this. So so that was about 2 years ago. I think we declared we're going to stand up to make now Admiral Cleveland a component commander, also to Space Force in addition to cyber, or Space Command in addition to Cyber Command. So how is that going? And do you think you're providing the support from the naval component that SpaceCom demands?
No, great question. So one, really happy to be here and happy to be here with this panel. So I'd like to point out that the Navy was actually the first service to establish a space component. This was in 1962, the Naval Aeronautics Group, which eventually became the Naval Space Operations or Satellite Operations Center, and it was stood down in 2002 when it was transferred over to the Space Command. So we were the first. Then we stood up a Navy Space Command, or Naval Space Command, 1985 to 2002. That was transferred over as well. But you're right, we were one of the latest, and the decision was made to stand up. And in 1 January of 2023, we formally stood up as the Naval Space Command, and that is the component to U.S. Space Command. And it was a really important decision, and the decision was also made to have it be, as you're well aware, an additional hat to Fleet Cyber Command, who is the cyber component to U.S. Cyber Command, also the commander of the Joint Force Headquarters Cyber, So that is the operational headquarters that provides cyber operations in support of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and U.S. Southern Command, and also as another hat, where we are the Navy Cryptologic Command. And in that role, provide the SIG and support to the National Security Agency and the SIG and support to space. And that provides a real focus on some of the over-the-horizon targeting and really some of the long-range fire support that we need to put that established architecture in place for the Navy. So we stood up as a component command in January, approved the mission functions and tasks, nothing that you wouldn't expect. We're doing the planning, the integration of capabilities. We also set the operational requirements for the Navy for the capabilities that we need to employ in space. But we don't have 5 separate staffs for those 5 separate hats. It is an integrated staff, and that creates efficiencies, but it also creates challenges as we've got more work, as you have heard from my esteemed panelists, with what we see adversaries doing in space, the need to create those resilient and redundant architectures, our use and employment of space for command and control and assured C2, for battle space awareness over the horizon targeting, and then of course for the execution of non-kinetic effects. So it is challenging. We are looking at developing and fielding specific capabilities, but we've found it really is efficient to have that multi-hat, because oftentimes there is a nexus between what we're doing in cyberspace, both from a defensive side and offensive side, and what we are seeing happen in space. And so the ability to have space, SIGINT, cyber with the maritime domain, the specific skill sets that we bring from operating, again, globally in the maritime domain as we look to contest both terrestrial, on-orbit, and cyber capabilities against U.S. space capabilities. We have more work to do, but we just concluded an exercise recently, so Pacific Sentry, 25 TAC 1, Apollo Griffin, 25 TAC 1, and Cyber Guard, 25 TAC 1. And of course, that is Space Command, Indo-Pacific Command, and Cyber Command's exercise. We had some of the most sophisticated and challenging capabilities and integration that was exercised, not white-carded, but exercised in this exercise. So it was really impressive to see the team come together to look at how we do integrated fires and how we do integrated planning. And so that has been critical. Are we there yet? No. We have more to do in terms of bringing on capability. We're looking at establishing space commands, so task force space, establishing integrated firing elements that we will provide forward, and then working, of course, with General White as he looks at and examines his command and control structure, how we best employ our service-like capabilities, and the fact that we are both a cyber and space component has proven to be a real strength.
And so has those evil resource sponsors in the Pentagon managed to get you any more manning and resources? I mean, that was the challenge when we snapped the chalk line, and there was we need about X if you're going to be serious about this.
It is still a challenge. So we're still working, again, it's a particularly challenging fiscal environment with that we are dealing with, but we're still working. That integrated staff means that we are constantly maneuvering across the demands of all of our combatant commanders, as well as on the Navy side, to ensure that we are appropriately resourced.
Okay, great. Hey, so Mr. Hill, back on active duty when I was that evil resource sponsor and attending Water Base, I was a fan of the stand-up of Space Force and Space Command. But that was just a new teammate to plug into. And as they're establishing new budgets, priorities, and everything, our team was laser focused on satellite communications and how they're going to support the maritime forces, because we're largely dependent. We cast off lines, and our mission is going to depend on that. So we were watching closely some of those transitions. But there's so many missions in space. Could you clarify some of the competing mission sets, or would you even clarify that they're competing at all? Are the services working together? Is it policy driven or service priorities? What's your take on that?
I don't see the missions as competing so much. I like to simplify space, a very simplistic way, but you think about it, we do about 5 things. We've historically done 5 things in space. We generate data, we process data, we store it, we transport it, and we protect it, assure it. And those networks in space, whether they're ISR networks or comms networks, they're extensions of networks that go to the sea, go to the air, and not part of this conference, but also go to the ground. So in the modern world, information dominance is essential to the ability of the joint force to do its missions, to be able to defend, to be able to provide the deterrence that you need across your conventional and capabilities. So those space missions are all part of that picture. Now, the new missions that have emerged, and why it was so important, I think, to create a Space Force, you did not have any service that was responsible full-time for assuring American superiority in that domain. That was not part of the Air Force's writ. The air domain was the Air Force's writ, and providing space services or the utility might, that was the way that had been set up. And that's how they managed it. And the Department of Defense managed it the same way. The Department of Defense did not take a strategic approach to the domain and say, if I am so reliant and ever more reliant on this domain, why am I not also assuring it? So standing up a Space Force to do that was a very important part of that decision. At the same time, Goldwater Nichols is still the way we're organized. And so having a Space Command, which is responsible for the operational piece and the service to the organization, training, and equip, made a lot of sense as well. So those missions, I don't think they compete anymore in space than you would see analogous missions competing in air, sea, or land.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask Mr. Adams a question, and I got a good one sent in here. So just put the word Golden Dome in your heads for a minute. And I'll ask that in a minute. But first, I want to ask Mr. Adams, I've been out here with industry 18 months trying to help us all win. I see the challenges of communicating this thing of requirements and opportunity, and I heard what you said, we can do this. Where do you see us, or where do you see the DoD or the government, shooting behind the duck or not taking advantage of some opportunities?
Sure. And I really like the view of space, because I think folks get confused that it's fundamentally different in some way, and it isn't. It's really about connecting or integrating. So I'll build on that. I think the U.S. Navy and the broader department is doing a great job integrating space into all domains. However, I do think as you look closely at some of that integration, and I'll cite recent successes in Valiant Shield, clearly showing significant capability of integrating things into long-range targeting, ISR, PNT, etc. And conferences like this, just to have the conversation, are really good signs. But if you look closely at that integration, there's still a lot of seams, right? The speed of light is fast. Computers can process things pretty quickly. That's not where the seams often are. The seams are in the human interactions, the policy interactions, the title interactions, the multi-service interactions. So I think we really have to get after those seams. And that's going to require the Navy and the broader department to be relentless in the JROC process, to really get validated requirements flowed through such that industry can respond and the broader government can respond to stitch up those seams and get speed of information, speed of tasking, speed of processing, everything that John said, to the fight quickly.
So, the president signed this executive order for Golden Dome. Does industry know what he wants?
It's interesting, there's a future question if we get to it. One of my asks of the department, and I'm going to modulate my answer a little bit because I would have said is stable, clear requirements. Although I backed off that quickly because we're not necessarily looking for a shall statement, but a clear description of the problem, a clear description of the mission, something that we can rally around. It can be a design reference mission that bounds the particulars, but the current state of an ask, such as the Golden Dome for America, what you're likely to get from industry is a whole bunch of ingredients, right? We're going to saturate you with algorithms and brilliant ideas, but until you tell us what problem we're trying to solve, you won't really get the full engagement of the analytical capability, the mission engineering, the multi-domain answer to get after it, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be a singular thing, but we really have to get to a more crisp definition of what are we trying to solve, such that ModSim and all of that can kick in and help with the solutions.
Well, so Mr. Hill, I'll just ask you: does OSD have a vision or understanding yet of that problem they're trying to solve? Unfortunately, typically every time there's a slogan or a name like Golden Dome or JADC2, I mean, I assume there's already an office, they've printed stickers, they're handing out coins, and that everybody in industry is coming along and here's your Golden Dome answer. Has it been defined yet what the problem is enough to establish any policy or that the services are putting out requirements or bids?
Well, Jeff, I'll probably disappoint you here, because what the very clear part of that executive order was that the things that are in it, people have read, and you can boil it down. We want to push the state of the technological art, we want to protect the American people, we want to assure the nuclear second strike. Those things are in it. But what the direction to the DoD was to give the president architectures that the president could then fold into the president's budget request to Congress. So that's what the president to start describing what the president wants to unveil when the time comes on that. We did in the process going forward. Of course, people know this defense agency had a big industry day. People got a lot of ideas in from industry. I think they're scheduling a little more towards the beginning of May. And so what comes out in the budget process is where you will end up seeing a lot more definition of where this is headed.
Okay, all right, so with that, see that gave Dr. Sandhoo 4 to 5 minutes to think about this. So what's the answer, Dr. Space Development Agency already working on this?
If you look at the underlying problem, to a certain extent, yes, right? So we all have cyber targeting and advanced missile threats. So that means, so I think we are working that already for the BACOM and the Homeland already. The question then comes, how does it get, Chris's point, how does it get integrated into the rest of the architecture, right? So this is the SDA's problem set is a small subset of all the potential threats out there. And these architectures already exist to deal with the rest of it, right? But the low latency and survivable and proliferated architecture is one approach to this. We've had other approaches up to this point. That's kind of the Euro approach to this. To Mr. Hill's point, we, just like everybody else within the DoD, we're tasked with this. We provide the inputs. They're back up there. And one of the things that Tranche 3 SDA was focused on, which was a custody layer, we have to maintain custody of advanced threats. So that custody layer may play a role in this at some point, but we are standing by, for the feedback on that.
Senator Berg, so getting back to the maritime content of this, you have a great thing about being in the Navy, on a ship, a submarine, off to sea. Once you cast off the lines, you're alone and unafraid. And anytime Admiral Tafalo would want to send me a tasker or something, girls, good to understand. Keep moving. He just left. But so why is space capability, that overhead market, why is that so dependent for ships, submarines, and aircraft out there? I mean, I thought we were RMD, that's what we're for, versus it's just enabling some 1,000-mile screwdriver to poke the ships.
I think we've had some of that discussion already on how important space is to everything that we do. And what this is really in response to is we're facing, I think, an unprecedented threat environment in space. where if we look at China, since 2015, they have had a 1,000% increase in their satellites on orbit. And their ability through, again, terrestrial, on orbit, as well as cyber threats against our space architecture that threatens our ability to have assured command and control, our ability to do long-range fires, and our intent to really have a consolidated architecture that allows us to do both ISR, targeting, and again, assured command and control. We rely on space in everything that we do. And so that reliance and those unprecedented threats are really what is driving the fact that we have got to have and develop those capabilities that allow us to provide precision maneuver as well. So it is not simply our fact that we've got to do long-range fires, and again, this requires our over-the-horizon targeting capability. We've got to have the capabilities, precise capabilities, that enable us to do precision maneuver inside weapons engagement zones. Otherwise, as we look at the capability to develop both long-range ballistic missiles and hypersonic threats, that we will be threatened from the time we leave San Diego. And as we have seen with some of the cyber capabilities with Bolt Typhoon and Sol Typhoon, pre-positioning of assets within our critical infrastructure, as well as pre-positioning of effects within our telecoms, is China is looking to also hold at risk our ability to mobilize components out to coast. So all of this presents a threat environment that demands that we have and preserve our freedom of maneuver in space, and that we preserve our ability to control space.
We do a lot of prep and some notes back and forth to prepare for these, so we can have a good panel and it'll be educational for the audience. And then you read the news in the morning before the panel there. So we'll look at you, Dr. Sandhoo. So I was reading an article about General Saltzman's testimony, and he's saying that this Admiral Berg mentioned the overhead architecture that is exponentially growing with the Chinese, and that we're watching them, observing them maneuver and basically do some of their own war games in space. And he said he doesn't have the budget or has a budget challenge coming in. Is our how fast we're going to move? Is it limited by industry's capacity to deliver and scale, or is it our ability to innovate, or is it really a budget limitation?
Northrop projects, right? There's a piece of that in there. But to go back to Berg's point here, if you go back enough in history, I spent most of my career at around, so I'm gonna take it SAI off for a second. Most of the stuff you see out there for warfighting was done by the Navy for the Navy for the long time, right? It was done because that's the one force that needed that. And the dependence and integration of that across that domain, it makes it complicated. So when you start looking, if you just take the Maritime example just for a second, and you start looking at what the mission that the United States Navy has for the joint force, and you kind of put that in, look at through that lens of the space force, what the mission space force has for the joint force, right? There's two key aspects of that. One is protect and defend the space domain, right? And I think when the CSO talks about that, he's talking about some piece of that. Like, to protect and defend the space domain is a daunting task, right? The second piece of that is to support the joint force, right? Which is the stuff that the Army and Navy used to do 10 years ago, right? We had capabilities within the stovepipes, now it's all part of the Space Force. And piece of that, basic threat aspect, the challenge piece is what SDA is focused on. So we have to be able to do both of them to do that. What's the near-term piece, which is, depending on who you ask, is to be able to support the joint force and they have to do, which is to be able to deliver them all the space capabilities that we have, right? There's the operational environments, there's the ISR, there's the missile warning piece, there's the SATCOM piece. With the exception of BNK and COM, the other two, up to this point, have mostly been a J2 type function in the joint force. What SDA started doing, what the realization was back in 2019, was that space piece, long-range kill chains, being able to produce effects, that is coming now more to a J3 kind of a thing, right? That's what we're focused on. So do we have enough money to do all of that stuff? No, but we have to prioritize what's important. We have to be able to deliver these capabilities into environments that we are faced with, and then we have to be able to protect and defend our space-based capabilities. Because without them, you don't have the rest of the capabilities that Joint Force needs, right?
Okay. So there's no way we could have a panel or discussion on space and somebody's not going to ask a question about SpaceX and Starship. So it's been sitting here in my queue for most of the panel. So I'll ask a two-parter to Mr. Hill and Admiral Berg. So obviously there's extraordinary utility by the architecture that already exists out there. And ships are even, experimenting, our Navy ships are experimenting right now. Slap those little antennas on and it exponentially increases the bandwidth for some things. How we integrate it, there's probably still some challenges. But from a policy perspective, if we saw some turn on, turn off early in the Ukraine and maybe some discussions about hypothetical that maybe a company or whether it be SpaceX or somebody else might disagree with the U.S. policy and turn that part of the system off. Is that something that's a policy issue that's being questioned for taking advantage of existing commercial capability?
I think you've had that in every sector where we rely on commercial, and space is not the only sector where we rely on commercial. There's always been this question of will commercial go with us as far as we need to go? And what you see, and we talk about this in the commercial space integration strategy, the risks and how industry manages risks, contract prices, and insurance, and other ways. The specific anecdotes that you referenced were there's always like a small grain of truth wrapped inside a whole bunch of confusion on things, and I testified on some of that before. I'm not going to repeat all that testimony, but I think what you're looking at, going back to my first answer, is constantly reevaluating which of the things you need to own and do yourself, and which of the things that you say that will be better done by commercial, and I only need to own a certain piece of the mission area. If I take satellite communications, nuclear command and control is probably something I would like to start with a system that the United States government owns. But I'm not necessarily going to say that's the only way I would do nuclear command and control. Missile warning is something I'd like to start with, something the United States government owns, but there could be proper payloads hosted on commercial systems that I can work into the architecture. So it's a sense of what do you need for your mission assurance? How do you want to manage your risks across a whole sea of risks?
I got goosebumps when you said nuclear command and control.
Yeah.
I was an SSB NCO, and I worked down in the angelics, and I paid attention to that. So, Admiral Berg, so how do you see the Navy operating or trying to take advantage of existing commercial capability and integrate that to our ships and our own command and control systems right now?
As you alluded to, we're already doing it. I mean, I think everyone recognizes that SpaceX and the whole proliferated LEO architecture provides really astonishing resiliency. And in Russia-Ukraine, we got a chance to see what that meant, again, for that kind of resilient command and control. And I also think, as you look at commercial writ large, it is providing some innovation, it provides some new ideas, and it will be a critical component for how we're going to advance at the scale that we need. So we have a Stinger program where we are bringing, again, the Starlink capability out to the ships. Generally, we've operated at low data rates, and so that provides a whole range of challenges that obviates that as a limb fact. But then, of course, we also have to operate in end-kind environments at times, and so we're going to have to balance both of those and are working through what that architecture will look like. But to the point of in fact, last week I was over at NDU and had a discussion with a couple different companies, and I think the answer for all of it is, what do you buy, what do you have to have government owned, and what can you contract, and how you write your contracts. And so ensuring that where we've got reliance on space capabilities, We craft our contracts to ensure that we've got the assurances we need that we will have that capability at the time and space of our choosing. But we can't do this without space. The innovation and the speed at which they are advancing, this has to be a government commercial nexus that we have as we look to drive and build that architecture of the future.
Okay, a good question came in on allies. I'll ask another two-parter for Dr. Sandhoo and Mr. Adams. So, as Space Development Agency continue to try to move fast and avoid those barnacles of bureaucracy, that's my new term I'm trying to get established. Are you able to use allied or foreign space agencies in your work? Are you able to take advantage of that? Are they taking advantage of it?
Yeah. John, I had a little bit think to what Berg just said. So one of the decisions we had to make back in 2019 with Space Development Agency was, do you just go out and buy a completely commercial architecture? And there's a thing called resale housing anywhere somewhere, right? Weapon system of naval weapon, right? How do you qualify those systems for that? So that's what the path we went down at SDA was to no existing radios for the tactical users, right? So the architecture that we came up with at the time was that the 15,000 Link 16 radios out there, the IBS receivers out there, now that needs to be upgraded to provide this space there to do all that stuff, right? Now, as we evolve into that, maybe you start putting in the commercial stuff that do this downlinks, right? It's easy to do that on a Presto force, but on a platform, naval platform, it is going to be hard to do. As for international and partnerships, well, the other thing I said did was establish standards. We have a standard for NEPA, we have standard for OCTs, right? These are published standards that are built. If you build to those standards, you can integrate it into the architecture. So you don't need to go, I don't need to go buy a spacecraft or something from a performer, but if our allies build to those standards with the right crypto, they can be part of the architecture. So that's how we approach that problem. Again, it goes back to that survivable and resilient architecture that is open to some extent, but with the right keys, with the right handshaking, it gets integrated into the architecture. So that's what it does in the allied partners.
So, Mr. Adams, is the competition that industry, U.S. space industry deals with, is it really amongst U.S. or is there real foreign competitors out there that are also bringing game that you're competing against?
I think I'll maybe mention 3 points. Going back to a few questions ago, I don't think we're limited by innovation. I don't think we're limited by capacity. And as you think about that, there are certain spaces in which both us and our allies have a vested interest in certain missions, and sometimes that can help move the economics forward, right? They support additional funding to build additional capacity, and then we share that mission capability. I think it's an effective way to get through some of the economics. Two, just to build on GP's comments, it's not always that the best athlete component, the best athlete payload, the best athlete solution is built in the continental US. And when that is the case, we will go outside, especially if it's for some of the proliferated systems, and leverage that capability and give our expertise in addition to it. I'm going to avoid the tariffs conversation here, but that does play a role in some of the economics as well. And then lastly, direct partnerships can go a long way, right? We recently had a partnership in which we leveraged Norway mission that was going to polar orbit, and we hosted a national security program in a very effective mission and economic way to achieve it in ways that hadn't been done before. So I think those are 3 good examples of where we choose to partner and leverage our allies in good mission and economic ways.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
We are still struggling with the FAA approval to do Link 16 testing codes. Every testing we have done up to this point has been for regions and the Australian for space, I think 16, and the shipments. Because we haven't got the necessarily approvals yet. So that's where the other reason partners come in. We literally got the Norwegian airplane before we talked to US.
They're saying the larger government is holding you back from the testing.
They have to do due diligence, right? As
We're
if
going to
they-
get into the spectrum discussion, aren't
In
you?
the, yes, yeah, I don't want to go down with that, but again, that's what the allies piece, right? The fact that we've invested in allied assets, our demonstration mission is key. I mean,
Good. Oh, and I frustrated a moderator 3 years ago on a space panel. Every question he asked me, I just answered, talking about challenges of spectrum sales. So anyway, don't drag me into that. Hey, so Mr. Adams, do you think that does the DoD, does the government do a good job of integrating industry? Because no one company provides the entire package of something, and in this, the expertise is I don't know if you think it's fulsome or still growing within the government for the ability to manage these programs and whether a government integrates or industry integrates. How well do you think that's managed?
I mean, like any complex ecosystem, there's good pockets and pockets where we need to do better. But in general, I think there's an increasing momentum building around better integration across the department with industry, across the department with commercial, and certainly across the defense industrial base and the department side of industry and the commercial side. I think it's important that we keep saying and versus or in a versus construct, right? We talked about Starlink and communications, certainly a highly capable system, arguably balanced by SDA and the transport layer, right? That is an and, not an or, and I think it's important that both continue to exist for a variety of reasons. So that integration is important. We also can't lose sight of the deep complexities and the deep advantages the U.S. has had for decades and continue those in some of the missions that you mentioned, around protected tactical SATCOM, protected strategic SATCOM, advanced missile warning, missile defeat, etc. I mean, for decades that has been a cat and mouse game in which the adversary is constantly trying to get in front, and we do technology investments and advancements to get back in front of them. So we can't lose sight of that deep expertise wherever it is in our industry.
So I want to work back on Navy space and the Navy in general. I mean, is there? You talked about some examples of what we're doing on ships to take advantage, of Starlink. Are we doing well partnering with space? Is the system in the middle between you, the user, and the innovation being clogged up by the Pentagon and our ability to get requirements out or funding? And do you think we're working well with industry and taking advantage of that as much as we can? Navy's doing.
I think there's always ways to improve on this, and there are some policy issues that continue to just be challenging as we look to share with our partners. And that is really, when it comes to allies and partners, I think that is truly our superpower as the United States, is the ability to build these deep relationships across cyberspace, across all of the domains. And those partnerships with those nations are not just treaty allies, but key partners as we look at considerable threats that we all face, creates an ability to have enhanced interoperability, to be able to look at when we're in, again, a contested environment, who's got the authority, who's got the capability, and who's got the force aligned to be able to execute, because we will not fight without our allies. And so it becomes really essential. And then what becomes even more essential is your ability to practice it in exercises and to truly exercise these capabilities. Again, we've got more to do. We have been, as part of already being a component in CyberCom, we've been able to leverage some of those cyber relationships to build out the space relationships with not just our closest allies from a Five Eyes perspective, but also others that are bringing critical capabilities. There's more we need to do though, because ultimately, if we are going to effectively deter what is an increasingly weaponization of space, we've got to have that credible combat capability, we've got to be able to effectively communicate that to adversaries on how we deter, and we have to demonstrate it through our exercises, through operations, where we show the ability to execute that capability at a time and place of our choosing.
Okay, so Mr. Hill, back on Space Force and Space Com. I just happened to be in a good Pentagon front row seat when these were stood up, and you've been watching for well over a decade. So do you think, and those early days were tough. I went to visit my counterpart in the Space Force, and it looked like an empty room that somebody had just evacuated and pulled everything out, and there's a rusty old desk and a bunch of wires thrown there. Anyway, just, hard to stand up a force and a combat command. A little over 5 years later, do you think their operations are fully normalized? Space Com as a combat command or Space Force as a functioning service? How well do you think that's gone? Are we still climbing, or are we still?
Your new organizations always take time. And as I said earlier, I thought that recognizing that we are still organized gold, water, nickels, that is still the right way to do it for the domain. That's the normal approach to the domain. The breaking out of the separate service, when you're in the budget decisions, which is really where the rubber meets the road on many things, you now have the service at the table, you have the combatant command at the table, able to identify requirements from a command perspective, able to identify trade-offs from a service perspective, and elevate strategic trade-offs outside of one service, the Air Force as it was, up to the level of the Defense Department, and people can say, yeah, there's an Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, there's strategic trades that need to get light at the Secretary of Defense level. That is happening now. I think that was probably one of the most important things to change, to be changed. And likewise, having space come out of STRATCOM as its own command elevated that perspective of the operator, focusing full-time on the superior of the domain. The continuing growth and evolution of organizations, I think that will go on for some time. But I would continue to say the founding idea of the Space Force, of keeping it small and focused on those missions that it had, is the right approach. I'm always a little bit skeptical when I'm seeing people suggesting what look to me like barnacles to add on to the service. I think we can keep that service focused on efficiency if we resist that temptation to make it normalized to the point that it becomes a big barnacle infested organization. That's going to happen in the Defense Department.
Sure. Yeah, and I remember the first budget brief I watched for Space Force. It only took one cycle. I had to remember, wow, I've got to be a really good partner with Space Force from the Navy standpoint, because we can't be surprised by how they might alter systems, especially comms that are going to affect. So I would to that too, that if we're not going to agree, whatever, they can't be surprised at our response when they might present.
And to that point, the role of the Space Force, the Joint Force Architect for the Armed Forces, for the Space Architect for the Armed Forces, I think is what it's called, but they also have a role in the JROC process of integrating the space requirements. So that is really ensuring that what the Space Force is delivering is driven by the needs across the Joint Force. And what the Space Force is delivering is taking into account the way that the Joint Force operates. I think that's a very important change.
One point on this is from my last job where I was Deputy 3-5 for the Navy, spent a lot of time down in the tank and ops steps, etc. What the Space Force has been able, as they sit there in their seat as a service, have been able to bring to those discussions is really incalculable. Because we don't have the depth of space expertise across each of the services who sit there, and they are able to really bring that additional perspective to the discussion and debate. And then, of course, in the DMAGs and the JROC process. But that participation as a service has really changed the tone and tenor of a lot of the discussions that we're having.
Okay, Mr. Adams, here's the last question.
All right.
What is the one thing that the DoD or the government could do to help industry, help the DoD and government what it needs and wants? You can't use stable requirements.
That was one of the four things that I was going to answer to the question one. I think a lot of it right now is as we build momentum and we're going through a lot of change in the industry, and as several of us have said, that the pace is increasing, the threat, the pace of the threat is increasing, the pace of just the general space economy is increasing, everything is moving faster. From my standpoint, one of the most important things would be to stay on schedule, right? If we're going to make a commitment to RFP or an ATP or a production of a certain capability, staying on schedule is a big deal. We often align our investments to those dates. We obviously align our staffing, our talent to those dates. And if there's significant pressure to those dates, it creates pressure financially, which ultimately limits our ability to invest effectively, and it certainly impacts our ability to staff and move quickly. So I would say all of us should meet our commitments would be my ask.
Great. What a great panel. How about a big round of applause?